It's one of the most impactful books ever written. It sparked amazing good deeds, but also some real bad ones. It explores the biggest questions of our existence. Chances are, you have one sitting on a shelf somewhere. But what if I told you that the Bible isn't a book at all? At least, not in the way we usually think of a book. The single volume you hold in your hands is a carefully curated illusion. To truly understand it, we have to stop thinking of it as a single book and start seeing it for what it really is, an ancient library. A collection of texts written by dozens of authors over more than 1,000 years. And the story of how that library came to be is one of the most fascinating stories of all. So in this video, we're going to pull back the cover and explore the architecture of this library. Let's start with where it all began. To begin our journey, we have to go back in time, to a specific people in a specific place. The collection of works we call the Bible is, at its core, a small library of books that all emerged out of the history of the people of ancient Israel. In many ways, ancient Israel was just like any other ancient civilization. They built cities, they fought wars, they struggled with political turmoil and the threat of powerful neighbors. Their story is a human story, but what made them different was a long line of unique individuals who rose up among them. The prophets. And these prophets viewed Israel's story as anything but ordinary. They were convinced that the successes and failures of their small nation were not just random events. Instead, they saw Israel's story as a central part of what God was doing for all of humanity. These prophets looked at the chaos of the world, the wars, the injustice, the human struggle, and believed that God was working through their people to bring order and beauty out of that chaos. This is a radical idea. Think about that for a moment. Most nations write histories to glorify themselves. They record their great victories and heroic kings. But here, you have a people whose national story is primarily about their relationship, their successes, and their many failures with God. How does that change the way a story gets told? It transforms national history into a profound theological drama. But these prophets weren't just historians or theologians. They were literary geniuses. And to appreciate this library, we have to appreciate their artistry. Recognizing the literary sophistication of the biblical authors is absolutely critical. This isn't just an academic detail. It's the key that unlocks the text's deeper meaning and enduring power. The prophets of Israel were masters of their craft. They expertly crafted the Hebrew language to write epic narratives and compose sophisticated poetry, rich with intricate layers of meaning. They were masters of metaphor and storytelling. They leveraged all of these literary skills to explore life's most complicated questions about life and death, suffering, and the human struggle. They didn't just give simple answers. Instead, they told stories, they wrote poems, and they used metaphor to invite the reader into a dialogue with the text and with God. Let me offer an analogy. It's like the difference between a technical manual and a great novel. The manual gives you instructions. A great novel immerses you in a world, forces you to wrestle with complex characters, and leaves you changed. The biblical authors almost always chose the path of the novel. They wanted to engage not just your mind, but your imagination and your heart. This incredible literary project spanned over 1,000 years of history. So let's look at how the Jewish people eventually organized these works into their sacred scriptures, a collection they call the Tanakh. This incredible literary project unfolded over an immense span of time, more than 1,000 years. It began with Israel's origins, continued through the rise of their kingdom and the construction of their first temple, and endured through national catastrophe when they were conquered by the Babylonians and taken into exile. It was after their return and the building of a second temple that these sacred scriptures really began to be formed into the shape we have them today. This collection of Jewish scriptures is not an arbitrary pile of scrolls. It's a deliberately structured, three-part library designed to tell a single, cohesive story. The name the Jewish people gave to this collection is itself a guide to its structure, the Tanakh. Tanakh is an acronym, with each letter representing one of the three main sections of the library. First, we have T, which stands for Torah. The word Torah in Hebrew means instruction. This is Israel's 5-book foundation story. It tells of creation, the patriarchs, the Exodus from Egypt, and Israel's journey through the wilderness. The Torah lays the groundwork for everything that follows. Next comes N for Nevi'im. Nevi'im is the Hebrew word for prophets. This section includes the historical books that tell Israel's story from the prophet's point of view, interpreting its triumphs and tragic failures, and the poetic books of the prophets themselves, figures like Isaiah and Jeremiah. Finally, we have K, which stands for Ketuvim. Ketuvim is the Hebrew word for writings, and it's a diverse collection of poetic books like Psalms, wisdom books like Job, and more narrative works like Daniel. These three sections, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, form the Tanakh. Underlying this entire collection is the profound belief that through all of these diverse literary works, God speaks to his people. This three-part library tells one epic story about God working to bring order and beauty out of the chaos of our world. It all builds towards a powerful hope for a new leader. But then, right at the climax, the story just stops. This is where the structure of the Tanakh becomes so compelling. You have this masterfully crafted library, a collection of epic narratives and profound poetry, all woven together to tell a single, overarching story. The central plot is clear. It's about how God is working through the people of Israel to bring order and beauty out of the chaos of our world. The entire narrative builds towards a powerful climax. It generates a deep hope for a new leader, a messianic figure who would come and renew all creation. This leader would finally set things right, restore Israel, and extend God's blessing to all nations. And then the Tanakh concludes. And this leader never comes. It's an expertly crafted work with a missing ending. The final books leave the reader in a state of unresolved anticipation. The promises have been made, the stage has been set, but the main character never walks on stage. Why end it this way? This isn't a mistake. It's a deliberate literary choice. It's a forward-pointing arrow. It's a story intentionally left open, a question hanging in the air, waiting for its fulfillment. For centuries, this was where the story stood, until a few centuries later, when a Jewish prophet named Jesus of Nazareth appeared on the scene, claiming he was the one to carry the Tanakh story forward. The life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth didn't happen in a vacuum. His earliest followers saw him as the long-awaited answer to the Tanakh's open-ended story. And so, they began to compose new literary works not to replace the Jewish scriptures, but to complete them. These followers, the apostles, believed Jesus was that long-awaited leader. After his death and their claim that he was alive from the dead, they set out to tell his story. They composed several different kinds of works. First, they wrote what they called Good News, or in Greek, the Gospels, the four accounts of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Next, they wrote a historical account called Acts, which documents the spread of the Jesus movement outside of Israel. Finally, they circulated letters to the various new communities of Jesus followers that were forming all around the ancient world. Now, this is the crucial point. The apostles viewed their own writings as the fulfillment of that epic story found in the Tanakh. They saw themselves as continuing the literary genius of the Jewish tradition. They quoted from the Tanakh constantly, showing how Jesus' life connected to the ancient prophecies. They believed that God was speaking to his people through these new texts alongside the scriptures of Israel. For them, this wasn't a new story. It was the second and final volume of the one great story. So now, we have two major collections, the Tanakh, which Christians would later call the Old Testament, and these new apostolic writings, the New Testament. But another collection of Jewish writings complicated the question, what, exactly, belongs in the Bible? Finalizing the contents of the biblical library wasn't simple or quick. For centuries, there was an ongoing debate about which texts should be considered authoritative scripture. This history is the key to understanding why different Bibles exist today. The debate centered on a diverse group of other Jewish writings produced during the Second Temple period, roughly the time between the Old and New Testaments. These texts were highly valued in ancient Jewish communities, and from ancient times, there was a lively debate about whether they should be part of the scriptures. The Christian movement inherited this debate, and for centuries, Much of the Second Temple literature was read by Christians as part of the biblical tradition. Over time, as Christianity grew, different traditions came to official decisions about these books. Here's a breakdown of how it landed. From the beginning, all Christians recognized the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, and the New Testament as inspired scripture. That was the foundation. The Catholic Church eventually made it official and included a number of books from the Second Temple collection in their Bible, calling them the Deuterocanonical books. Some Orthodox churches went even further, and their Bibles today use even more books from the Second Temple literature. Then, in the 1500s during the Protestant Reformation, new movement emerged. They wanted to go back to the oldest writings of the prophets and apostles as their sole authority. Therefore, Protestant Christians decided to accept only the Old and New Testaments. This history explains why a Catholic Bible has more books than a Protestant one. It's the product of different conclusions to a very old and complex debate. But understanding this brings us back to the biggest question of all. So, what is the Bible? It's a library of ancient, masterfully crafted literary works that together tell an epic, unfolding story. It begins with the foundation of the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures that point forward with an unresolved hope for a leader who will come to renew all creation. It continues with the New Testament, the collection of apostolic writings that tell the story of Jesus and the movement he began, a story which his followers claimed was the long-awaited fulfillment of that ancient hope. Understanding this structure, this history, is the first step to reading the Bible with depth and wisdom. It allows us to appreciate it not as a flat instruction manual, but as a deep and sophisticated collection of narrative, poetry, and wisdom that has profoundly shaped the world. We believe the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus and has profound wisdom for the modern world. But that leaves us with the ultimate question: how does a collection of books, produced over 1,000 years by all these different authors, actually tell one unified story? Well, that is the question we will address in our next video.